The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org radio with this week's edition of Global Alert News for September 5th, 2015. The purpose of our site, again, GeoEngineeringWatch.org, is to simply disclose data on the critical scenarios unfolding around the globe. We don't sell anything. We are non-political. So what's happened this week? What continues to happen this week around the globe? Stories the same in many ways, but getting much worse. Biosphere collapse continues. Economic collapse in spite of the efforts of the damage control team at the central bankers to prop up the completely fraudulent global financial markets. Still continues to flounder. That's not going to go away. This isn't a bump in the road. Not by any means. This is the change of paradigm that has been hidden for so long but can't be hidden any longer because, again, as I've said in previous weeks, as the biosphere collapses, market collapse is inevitable. Can't be hidden much longer. As the climate spins out of control, temporary fortunes will be made in one area in particular, on weather trading derivatives. This is an area of the stock market. It's literally a gambling casino based on weather disasters, where they'll happen, to whom. And this casino is literally run by the weather makers, the geoengineers. More on that later in the show. Mainstream media's job is to distract you. So what did they cover this week? What are some of the primary stories they covered? Jeb Bush knocks Donald Trump, in his own words. Latest web video feud. That's of extreme importance when the planet's imploding. How about another one? Kate Moss, wedding cake baker's 7 sweetest secrets. This is a CNN story covered on mainstream media news while we have ocean marine systems collapsing, forests burning down around the globe, atmospheric oxygen content plummeting. We're in the 6th great mass extinction right now. We have Arctic ice imploding, methane filling the atmosphere. We have 36 countries around the globe descending into chaos. We have refugees everywhere. They're not migrants. They're refugees. Why are there refugees? Because there's not enough resources to go around because of global conflict. The walls are closing in fast, and that's the best CNN can do. But wait, they have a few more. They also covered Senator Mike Rounds endorses Huckabee for president. Who cares? U.S. Open 2015, Serena Williams breezes to bizarre first-round win. Who cares? Who cares? And let's not forget Cosby accuser reacts to deposition release. How does this have any bearing on what we are going to face, all of us, very soon? And those who don't believe the walls are closing in, you'll believe it soon. I guarantee it. You'll have no choice but to face this issue. And another story from CNN, surprising catch shocks fishermen. He found a couple kittens in the water, and I care about the kittens, but is that the best CNN can do? They finished with this one. The all-important news story from CNN that they've spent a lot of time on, the fact that we can now order an Egg McMuffin 24 hours a day. This is the best CNN can do. They did in a roundabout way cover something interesting in one of their commercials. They advertised for Provigen, a new pharmaceutical to help improve memory from jellyfish. Now, isn't that a paradox? We have oceans dying around the globe. They're losing their oxygen content. They're becoming hypoxic and anoxic, no oxygen or low oxygen. And now we have jellyfish proliferating around the globe. Part of the reason the oceans are dying is because of the massive atmospheric spraying of heavy metal particulates, aluminum being a primary one. I'll cover more on that later. And that affects our cognitive function, our memory. Peer-reviewed study proves this. Aluminum exposure is extremely harmful to the human neurological system. So as our memory is destroyed from what we're being exposed to in every breath we take from an atmosphere that's saturated with toxic climate engineering particles, now we can take Provigen, taken from jellyfish that are proliferating around the globe, because again, jellyfish live in low oxygen zones, so we can try to counteract, I suppose, this diminishing memory and cognitive function from one of these species that happens to proliferate in a toxic environment. It just seems very paradoxical to me, but that's the best CNN could do. What's CNN not telling us about? Here's a stellar example. Here's a headline: the marriage of military and bankers. Notorious four-star general goes into banking with J.P. Morgan. What's a general doing going into banking? But not just any general. The article continues, proving yet again the ubiquitous ties between government and private interests. Four-star General Ray Odierno, who retired as the U.S. Army's Chief of Staff on August 14, made a rather abrupt leap in career choice to senior advisor for J.P. Morgan Chase. Less than a week later, think about that. How deep are the ties between the military-industrial complex and the banking empire? They're total. The article continues, not that the commander of the 14th Infantry Division, whose notorious reputation during the Iraq War included a propensity towards indiscriminate mass detention, extrajudicial killings of civilians, and was otherwise considering humanitarian work when the mega bank advising position happened to be open. This general's considering humanitarian work? This is astounding, but this is the kind of story CNN would never cover. It would seem the new role is perfect for Odierno, the article continues, as he will be advising CEO Jamie Dimon, the board of directors, and the operating committee with the international planning and country risk analysis, technology operations, and rapidly evolving issues of physical and cybersecurity, according to a company statement. We have nothing but criminal cabals running the country, and their ties are total. They're absolutely total. And I don't care what side of the fence they are. This is not a Democratic-Republican issue at all. They're just two sides to the same coin. They're just different mafia families that are involved in the owning of this country. That's exactly the scenario we have. The article continues further. J.P. Morgan's statement mentions the ex-general's role with, quote, physical security in his upcoming duties, but even a cursory glance at the practices by those under his command in Iraq make those goals seem questionable. A military intelligence specialist at the time, Kayla Williams, said they passed by Odierno's 4th Infantry Division, whose soldiers appeared, quote, mean and ugly. They stood on top of their trucks, their weapons pointed directly at civilians. What could these locals possibly have done? Why was this intimidation necessary? No one explained anything, but it looked weird and felt wrong, end quote, from a former Army sergeant. Though troops under Odierno's command were credited with capturing Saddam Hussein, their philosophy, which can be summarized as rounding up all the military-age males because they don't know or bother to find out who's good or bad, was, quote, dubious and transforming formerly neutral civilians into willing combatants. How would any of us react if a foreign occupier came in and started rounding up everybody of a particular age? In a country that had nothing to do with 9/11, absolutely nothing. But they have oil. How would anybody react to that? And here's a man who's now going into the banking industry, the biggest banks in the world, the banks that fund the military-industrial complex. It's a truly twisted web. The American public is caught in that web. If they don't wake up soon, there'll be nothing left to save. Nothing. That's how dire our situation is. This article continues. In fact, a member of the Psychological Operations Unit attached to Odierno's artillery brigade found it necessary to file a formal complaint concerning those troops' treatment of Iraqi civilians. After returning from Iraq, Odierno achieved the rank of Chief of Staff in 2011. Of course, that's what we see in our military. Those who are involved in the most dubious and questionable activities are the ones that are advanced, while still maintaining the support of the Bush administration. And again, I'm not an Obama fan either, believe me. Two sides to the same coin. To invade the country in the first place. According to The Intercept, he explained earlier this year Saddam was moving toward terrorism, and I believe that if he continued to have problems, we don't know what he would have done in terms of being part of the problem with terrorism. Is this preemptive action? I don't say Saddam was a great guy, but he had nothing to do with 9/11, and who armed him in the first place? The USA. Who's shaking hands with him? Visible for anybody who searches online, Donald Rumsfeld, after Saddam was given the gas he used to exterminate Kurds. We gave him those materials. The article finishes, though Odierno's abrupt transplant from top military commander to high-powered international banking advisor might have you shaking your head, has me shaking my head, such a convenient arrangement is far from atypical. As reported in the Boston Globe, in 2010, 80% of generals with at least 3 stars found placement as executive or consultants in the private sector, largely within the defense industry, nearly immediately upon retirement. The big revolving door. They give the contracts to this defense industry, and they get high-paying jobs the moment they leave the military. And all of us are going to pay the price. Why do we think that the kind of aerosol operations happen above our head every day and nobody says a thing? Too many people making money off of it, and I'll get to that in a while. Again, the weather trading derivatives, those who are making money off the weather disasters. Thanks to the military-industrial banking complex, the global climate modification assault continues, as I stated, and we're all breathing the fallout from these covert criminal programs. What do we have in California? Unprecedented drought, cataclysmic drought, heat, other places around the globe, unprecedented floods, the destruction of Earth's protective atmosphere. All of this is occurring, all of it directly connected to climate engineering programs, all of that directly connected to the military-industrial complex, all of that directly connected to the global banking cartels. People ask, where are the whistleblowers? If geoengineering is really going on, do we need a whistleblower when we can see what's happening with our own eyes? Above our heads, lab tests from precipitation, 70 in Shasta County alone, others from around the globe, that prove mountains of toxic heavy metals are raining down on us. Shocking red flags are going up everywhere to confirm the contamination from the ongoing spraying operations. Off-the-chart human diseases directly related to heavy metal exposure. Peer-reviewed studies, recent peer-reviewed studies proving bees are dying, our pollinators are dying from massive aluminum contamination, which is causing them to have dementia-like symptoms. We have a study of 1,000 whales from around the globe which contained, quote, jaw-dropping levels of aluminum in their tissues. Everywhere we see red flags of a total planetary contamination from the ongoing climate engineering programs. Who do people think is doing this? Some private contractor somewhere? Do they really believe that our government is not the core of these programs? It can't not be true. Only the Department of Defense could engage in this, and I don't mean to implicate only our government. Major powers around the globe are involved with the ongoing climate modification programs. This is nothing short of weather warfare. These programs are being used strategically against countries that do not go along with the policy wishes of the larger, more powerful countries. But who's the most powerful of all? The United States military spends as much as the next 10 countries combined. Who is the biggest elephant in the room, or who's the biggest bully in the room in this particular case when it comes to the manipulation and destruction of our climate? How did things get so bad? People ask this all the time if they find the courage to face what's happening for a few moments. How did things get so far off the rails? The medical definition of denial is a psychological defense mechanism in which confrontation with a personal problem or with reality is avoided by denying the existence of the problem or reality. From psychological study, we have this statement: never have so many been willing to deny so much reality. Straight from Psychological Study Manual. In the short term, psychological denial can help a person maintain their sanity, which would be threatened by an awareness of a painful truth or reality. In the short term, denial can help a person function day to day. In the short term, denial can prevent a person from having to acknowledge a painful thoughts, feelings, or behavior, and help them to maintain a worldview that is not threatened by an unacceptable reality or truth. In the long run, denial will kill us all if it continues. If we continue to live in a society that denies the gravity of what's unfolding around us, that refuses to face it, that simply wants to pursue their personal pleasures and ignore the unraveling that's occurring around the globe, we have no chance. That's a mathematical fact. For way too long, societies around the globe have not had to face reality. This is especially true for Americans. For way too long, we've been able to use our rising home prices, for example, for ATM machines in order to buy whatever distractions we wanted. New cars with nothing down, no interest, no payments, for who knows how long. All the while, resources are being looted, pillaged, and plundered from around the globe. From countries where people don't even have enough to eat. Much sooner than almost any dare to imagine, there will be no country where one can hide from such conditions. There will be no escaping the reality that it's unfolding. We have only one planet. We have decimated its life support systems from top to bottom. This is absolute fact. Anyone who, again, can't see the decline of the trees, the lack of insects, the incredibly hot, radiant heat as the UV layer is so the ozone layer, which releases UV radiation to the lower altitudes, is so decimated, the heat on surfaces is absolutely immense. So many signs: asthma, Alzheimer's, autism, everything we would associate with an atmosphere that's saturated with the materials already mentioned. Every sign we would expect to see, we see. So here's a recent headline that highlights the danger of these particulates: air pollution associated with increased heart attack risk, despite safe levels. We're told the air is cleaner. It's a blatant, glaring lie. Look up. People should look up and see just how dirty, dingy, and completely blocked and blotted out our skies are. And even if you don't see the horizon-to-horizon trails, and some days you don't see that many that are that visible, but you see the haze, the silvery white skies, especially when you look toward the horizon. Look back at old pictures and see that that is not a part of the landscape. It's not. That's exactly it. And I challenge people to search what I'm saying, and you'll find science study that states geoengineering, the introduction of particulates into the atmosphere for the purpose of solar radiation management, a very deranged and demented science, if you can call it that, approach to try to block some of the sun's incoming thermal radiation by filling the skies with sprayed light-reflecting particulates from the atmosphere. Science study states repeatedly, this will blot out our blue skies. What do we see? How many blue skies do we really see? Even when we don't see the very visible trails behind the aircraft, our skies are silvery white at best. And many days, the sky looks like something from another planet. What do you think is up there? It's not condensation. This is the biggest lie ever perpetrated, that this is just a condensation trail. We have film footage of these aircraft turning on and off for any who choose to investigate. Go to geoengineeringwatch.org and investigate. My point with all this, again, we are all arranging deck chairs on the Titanic, all of us, if we stay on this course. And the whole financial industry facade means nothing compared to a planet that doesn't support life. And once that planet doesn't support life, there will be no financial industry. There will be no civilization, period. How simple is that? This article, the headline I just read again, air pollution associated with increased heart attack risk despite safe levels. Fine particle pollution, this is directly from the article, also called PM 2.5, has the ability to reach the lower respiratory tract and carry a large amount of toxic compounds into the body. Studies prove exposure to air pollution is directly associated with increased risk of cardiovascular mortality. What a surprise. The smaller the particles you breathe, and the more of them you breathe, the more chance you will have of cardiovascular mortality, along with an endless list of other diseases. Every other commercial we see on now is an asthma commercial, allergy commercial. How can that be if our air is supposedly cleaner? Because here's another big lie. At best, air quality testing equipment all over the country, all over the globe, tests for PM 2.5, 2.5 microns. Generally, it's 10 microns, which is 4 times larger. But even at 2.5 microns, the particles used in climate engineering, what you see sprayed above your head, day in, day out, what's falling to the ground and contaminating everything, are nanoparticulates. A nanoparticle is 1/billionth of a meter. These particles are exponentially smaller than anything that the air quality boards test for. They go virtually undetected, under the radar, unreported. So we're told the grand lie that we have cleaner air while we're dying at a radical pace from everything we would expect to develop being exposed to these toxic heavy metal particles that are part of climate engineering. Now, again, many people ask, where are the whistleblowers? And I'll state this again. Why would any whistleblower step up when we have the Obama administration that has prosecuted more whistleblowers than all other administrations combined? Why would we have a whistleblower when we have examples of whistleblowers like John Kiriakou, who blew the whistle on torture, that our military was torturing people, our government was torturing people? Who went to jail? John Kiriakou, the only one who went to jail. We have people who have blown the whistle in the financial industry. Guess who went to jail? The people who blew the whistle. Edward Snowden, Manning, the list goes on. And do we need a whistleblower for something we can see with our eyes above our heads? Do we need a whistleblower to know that there's something radically wrong with the 9/11 story that we've been fed? How many people know there was a third building that collapsed? It collapsed in 7 seconds. A 50-story, 47-story steel structure high-rise. Never got hit by anything. Collapsed in 7 seconds. I challenge anybody to search Building 7 collapse, watch that 30-second video, which shows it collapsing 4 times because it collapsed in 7 seconds, and tell me there's not something radically wrong with the official story, which, by the way, they never even mentioned the third building collapse in the 9/11 Commission report. How can you not mention a steel structure high-rise that collapsed, never got hit by anything? How can you not mention that? Why do we need a whistleblower to tell us that something's wrong that we can see with our own eyes? Back to the lies and the climate and everything that's being manipulated around us. I want to continue the story from last week about the hurricanes, which I outlined in detail last week. Again, massive hurricane suppression going on. Part of this is connected to the weather trading derivatives, the global gambling casino on the climate run by the weather modification people themselves. But since last week, we have yet more records being set. Last week I outlined that we have all-time record activity of hurricanes in the Pacific, all-time record lack of activity of hurricanes in the Atlantic, a 10-year cessation of any major landfalls to the U.S. How can that be with record warm oceans? I outlined climate weather modification patents, hurricane suppression patents, specifically outlined that last week. There are more than what I outlined, but we have hurricane suppression patents. Why would we think this isn't going on? And it's not a good thing. People might think suppressing a hurricane, that's a great thing. It's not a great thing. You're interfering with Earth's life support systems. You're causing the oceans to stratify. You're stopping the planet from trying to cool itself. Why is that a great thing? The more you interfere with the system, the more the system collapses, just like the human body. How great are the pharmaceuticals that we all see advertised on every single station? That you take a new pharmaceutical for one ailment, and by the way, here's 20 things or 30 things or 50 things that are exponentially worse than the problem the pharmaceutical claims to treat. So since last week, we have had now 3 major hurricanes simultaneously, first time ever in the Pacific. First time ever. Another record for hurricanes in the Pacific. And since last week, we've had Tropical Storm Erica that should have developed into a hurricane. This is in the Atlantic Basin now, something that could affect the U.S., wiped out, as has been the case for the last 10 years. We have Hurricane Fred in the Atlantic Basin, also didn't go anywhere. Why is it that nothing that can threaten the U.S. develops in the Atlantic Basin, but record after record after record is set in the Pacific? Who's the biggest weather modification force on the planet? Obviously the U.S. military. Obviously. The military is exponentially larger than the next 10 countries combined. We need to wake up and understand why are they suppressing cyclones again? Because they don't want the gravity of the climate situation to be known. Florida is extremely susceptible now to coastal flooding. We've had at least 1 foot of sea level rise along the eastern seaboard. And for those who don't think that's the case, understand wherever you're at, if you haven't noted this or your statistics don't say this, sea level rise is not uniform globally. As much as that may surprise you, that's a science fact. But we have had 1 foot of sea level rise along the eastern seaboard, so they're trying to suppress that from becoming too visible. They're trying to keep any storms from spinning in the Gulf of Mexico, which would stir up the oil at the bottom of that body of water. So again, more records in the Pacific for excessive hurricanes and more records in the Atlantic for lack of hurricanes. Connect the dots. This is happening right now. It's going to continue. The spraying of our skies is absolutely horrific everywhere, while mainstream media covers nothing. If we look at the Atlantic hurricane season, again, the least active in decades, this is what they link this to. This is what Science Study links this to. And this is where the science community, for the most part, or in all too many cases, I should say, are simply paid to lie. And do they believe what they publish? I can't answer that. But they can't be this far into the dark. Here's another headline. Scientists examine African dust link to hurricanes. The article states, storm scientists are taking a closer look at whether giant dust clouds from the Sahara could join the El Nino phenomenon as a leading indicator of the ferocity of Atlantic hurricane seasons. The chief researcher said, what we have seen is more dust, fewer hurricanes. This is the chief of Laboratory for Atmospheres at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. We can see on satellite imagery aircraft aerosol dispersions over these storms. The scientists in so many of these institutions are simply paid to explain away as natural what the power structure does not want the public to know and to understand is going on. The article continues, the busy and damaging hurricane seasons of 2004 and 2005, all-time record-shattering hurricane activity, by the way, which rattled global energy and insurance markets, back to the weather trading derivatives I mentioned earlier, have heightened interest in storm forecasting and in research on factors that make tropical cyclones spin up into monster storms or wither and die at sea, hurricane suppression, i.e. The article continues, 4 powerful hurricanes hit Florida in 2004, and the record-setting 2005 season produced Hurricane Katrina, which became the costliest natural disaster in U.S. history. Again, keep the weather trading derivatives in mind, when it crushed the U.S. Gulf Coast and swamped New Orleans, causing $800 billion in damage. Studies so far indicate that dust clouds from Africa, which can grow as big as the continental United States. I want to state again, when we can see on radar the aircraft dispersion into the sky, that is solar radiation management, which affects convection, which affects hurricanes, and we have hurricane patents, which I went over last week, hurricane suppression patents, that specifically call for the spraying of particles into storm, that now we have paid scientists trying to explain away as dust from Africa. I'm not saying there's not dust from Africa, but I'm saying they're ignoring and they're paid to ignore the climate engineering elephant in the room. So again, this article continues. Studies so far indicate that dust clouds from Africa, which can grow as big as the continental United States and stretch all the way to the Caribbean and Central America, tend to cool the Atlantic by reflecting sunlight. What is solar radiation management? The whole goal of geoengineering, and specifically solar radiation management, is to spray light-scattering particles into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight. The article continues, hurricanes are fueled by warm water, so cooler seas could mean fewer or less intense storms. These guys talk about this as if they don't have a clue, which is an absolute lie. Anybody who does any research has a clue. This is their area of expertise. How could they not have a clue? They're paid to act like they don't have a clue. Just like the scientists in the 60s who said that spraying Agent Orange wouldn't hurt our troops were paid not to have a clue. Just like scientists around 9/11 at the National Institute of Science and Technology, those scientists and healthcare quote-unquote experts and official agencies that told our first responders it was safe to go back into the 9/11 site when they knew it wasn't safe, and now we have 3,000 of our first responders with terminal cancer. The lies are beyond comprehension on so many fronts. It's astounding to even try to get your arms around. This article continues. The hot, dry masses of dust may also interfere with already formed hurricanes, i.e. suppression. The particles in the air suppress the hurricanes. That's exactly what this statement is from a NASA scientist. Researchers say that a cloud can increase wind shear and inject dry air into a cyclone if the two come in direct contact. Knowing whether or not a cyclone has Saharan dust in its vicinity can and is a major factor in determining its intensity. The spraying of aerosols into a cyclone is covered on climate engineering patents specifically for hurricane suppression. None of this is talked about here, none of it. Discovery Channel in 2006, after the record-shattering 2005 year, did an episode stating that after the destructive 2005 season, the government wanted to re-intensify its hurricane suppression efforts, and magically we have seen no major landfalls in 10 years. The oceans are dying. The planet is superheating because it can't cool itself, at least in parts, and there's a lot of factors why it's heating. Anthropogenic activity, the putting of 100 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere a day, the cutting down of forests, the paving of the planet, all of this has an effect. But climate engineering, the most destructive of all. This article finishes. This is very telling. These last couple of months have been the dustiest summer of all, about 5 times as dusty as last year. Why would that be? Why would there be so many particles in the air suddenly that nobody can explain? In 2010, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration put a study out stating that in the last 10 years, atmospheric aerosols, which are tiny particles suspended in the atmosphere, exactly what's named in geoengineering patents, to be sprayed out of the back of aircraft, the quantity of these particles has doubled in the last 10 years, and they don't know where it's coming from. How big a red flag is that? So we have so many glaring red flags, from the respiratory issues, the bees that are dying from aluminum, whales packed with aluminum showing up in soils, streams, snow, human testing, everywhere. Aluminum being a primary element named in climate engineering patents. How many people want to face the fact that every breath they take, doesn't matter where they live, is laden with these incredibly lethal nanoparticulates used for climate engineering? How many people want to face that fact? That they can't hide, irreparable damage has already been done, autism increased 10,000%, 10,000% increase in the last 40 years. Where do we face reality? At what point do we face reality? So, again, to clarify what solar radiation management is, this is straight from a dictionary definition. Solar radiation management projects are a type of climate engineering which seek to reflect sunlight and thus reduce global warming. Proposed examples include the creation of stratospheric sulfate aerosols, the tiny particulates I've been talking about. Again, I challenge anybody, search this. Search solar radiation management and see what you find. They would not reduce greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere and thus do not address problems such as ocean acidification caused by excess carbon. Their principal advantages as an approach to climate engineering is the speed with which they can be deployed and become fully active. Again, this is straight from a dictionary definition. As well as their potential low financial cost. What's the cost to the environment? Who cares about the financial cost? What's the cost to human health? And if our planet doesn't support life because climate engineering has shredded the ozone layer and contaminated the entire surface of the Earth, how can that be considered a low financial cost? How is that possible? By comparison, this dictionary definition continues. By comparison, other climate engineering techniques based on greenhouse gas remediation, such as ocean iron fertilization. Now, I want you to consider again, for those who don't know and haven't heard me talk about ocean iron fertilization, this is another form of geoengineering we believe directly connected to the aerosol solar radiation management, climate engineering. So the particles they spray over the ocean for solar radiation management settle down to the surface of the ocean, and they're using some of the heavy metals because that then becomes material that is conducive for ocean iron fertilization, the creation of algae blooms to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. How smart is that? Or how insane is that, would be a more correct statement. When the ocean is already acidifying to dangerous levels, to try to stimulate further acidification by forcing the ocean to absorb even more carbon, what kind of scientist would push that as a solution for global warming? Only one that's not sane. This definition finishes. Solar radiation management projects can therefore be used as climate engineering quick fixes, while levels of greenhouse gas can be brought under control by greenhouse gas remediation techniques. What an incredibly baseless statement all this is. Nobody's trying to control greenhouse gases. And how can you call a quick fix? How can the science community, the climate engineering community, call spraying toxic particles all over the globe that are shredding the ozone layer, completely disrupting the hydrological cycle, contaminating the entire planet, how can they call that a quick fix? It's not a fix. It's taking us from the frying pan and throwing us into the fire. Who's making money from all the disasters? Again, weather trading derivatives. Weather trading derivatives are nothing more than a disaster-based gambling casino, again, run by the same global powers that are in many ways orchestrating the disasters in the first place. Weather forecasts are now nothing more than the scheduled weather. Major forecasting organizations are also owned by the power structure. In the case of what the public believes are federal agencies, those agencies have their modeling done by private weather modification contractors like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service has all their modeling done by Raytheon. Lockheed Martin does the modeling for the FAA. The foxes are running the hen house. Weather risk management is the term for the industry that is thriving from the rapidly increasing occurrences of weather disasters. I'm going to read a mission statement from one of the disaster capitalist companies. that's below. This is their mission statement. The weather can generate substantial economic losses. It is essential to take such risk seriously. This is like racketeering. We have cities and municipalities and states paying for protection from the weather, paying the weather makers. How insane is this situation? Is this what Hurricane Sandy was all about? I encourage people to remember Hurricane Sandy. The forecasters that can't get anything right somehow knew that this hurricane would make an unprecedented 90-degree westerly turn 7 days ahead of time. How did they know that? I just want people to ask themselves, how did they know that that could happen 7 days ahead of time? Unprecedented turn. This mission statement from the weather risk management industry continues. Adverse developments in temperature, precipitation, wind, and other weather variables can result in losses for a multitude of companies and state entities. Risks derived from weather moves independently of whether they are of extreme or moderate nature constitute extended and permanent threat to a country's productive capacity. Fortunately, these days there exists a financial solution that can provide efficient cover. Pay us for your protection. This is how big the cancer is. That we have cities and states around the coastal regions and other regions that are having to pay for protection, if you will, from climate disasters. And we see a 10-year lull in hurricanes for U.S. landfall. Do we not see a connection here, truly? How many dots do we need to connect before we see a picture? The global catastrophe reassurance industry is growing exponentially. What a surprise. Along with the exponential increase in natural, which are engineered in many cases, disasters. When we have Boston last year receiving record snow, while we have nothing 14,000 feet up in the Sierras, anybody who thinks that these scenarios we're seeing are natural, when we have so much provable weather modification going on, how can we call anything natural? Here's one more quote from the Weather Derivatives Company. They state, "Our industry continues to change and grow. Unusual atmospheric weather patterns don't hurt." What a surprise. The worse the catastrophe, the more they are making from it. We need to smell the coffee, especially here in California, where they can shut off our water as long as they want. Look back at the disseminations I gave going back years, because the data dictated this scenario had to happen. It had to happen. So long as we see the blanket spraying of the Eastern Pacific, and we have this on satellite imagery, they can shut off, alter, or diminish our rainflow as long as they choose. This is not a natural cycle. We have meteorologists everywhere reading scripts, protecting their paychecks and pensions. Nobody wants to stand out of the shadows. And though many have concluded that financial profit is the primary motive behind the ongoing climate engineering insanity, the true reality is exponentially larger. It's more complicated and much more dire. From the methane release planetary emergency that's unfolding in the Arctic, collapsing marine ecosystems, the dying of the forests around the globe, there's many layers to the immense challenges we face, and geoengineering is connected to them all. In addition to all of this, the highly toxic climate engineering fallout is literally contaminating the entire planet, as stated, all living organisms on it. There will never be a shortage of those that are willing to profit from misery and destruction, but their gains will be short-lived. Like pirates filling their pockets with loot while the entire ship goes down, the disaster capitalists will soon be forced to face the consequences of what they have so willingly participated in. Those of us that are awake need to combine our efforts to expose and halt the climate engineering insanity, while there's yet some part of the planet's life support systems to salvage. So what's Obama up to these days? This is a recent headline from CNN. The White House describes Alaska as a state to become the canary in the climate change coal mine, complete with raging wildfires, accelerating ice melt in the Arctic, vanishing glaciers, whole villages forced to relocate away from rising seas. President Obama will carry that urgent message to Alaska this week in the hopes his long journey away from his busy agenda in Washington will begin to change the national conversation on global warming. Of course, Obama will never, ever admit to the climate engineering insanity that's going on around the globe, nor will any other administration or any other politician. They're bought, sold, paid for from the bottom up. This article from CNN continues. His first step while he's there, officially renaming the country's tallest mountain from Mount McKinley to Denali. How is that going to help anything? An historic nod to the region's native population, which I certainly sympathize with, which the White House says is under threat from the already present threat of climate change. Every single one of us is breathing what they are spraying. Again, the mortality rate is going off the chart, respiratory mortality, and everything we would connect to this. So while Obama is doing public relations, he is a part of the problem every bit as much as every other administration before him, although the programs are bigger and more impactful now than ever. So the direct threat from climate engineering, I want to bring this point home because everything else we face means nothing if we don't deal with this issue. Every breath we take is laden with the toxic materials that we can see above our heads every single day. We don't have blue skies anymore because they're filled with particulates. And we have peer-reviewed study to show, as I've already stated again and again, that these particles, toxic metals, are showing up everywhere, from bees to whales to us. Here's a new headline that all of us should consider. The headline states, dementia now striking people in their 40s. The article continues, dementia and other neurological brain diseases are striking people younger and younger, according to a new study conducted by researchers at the University of England, published in the journal Surgical Neurological International. These diseases have reached levels that are epidemic, the researchers said. And they reach them so quickly that environmental factors must be largely to blame. Think about that. Epidemic levels of neurological diseases, and the study states environmental factors must be to blame. How many dots do we need to form a picture? The article continues with a direct quote from a primary research. The rate of increase in such a short time suggests a silent or even a hidden epidemic in which environmental factors must play a major role, not just aging. Again, that was stated by the lead researcher of this study. Modern living produces multi-interactional environmental pollution, but the changes in human morbidity, including neurological disease, is remarkable and points, again, to environmental influences. Consider what this study is acknowledging. Everything we have stated, all the lab tests we have done going back many years, verifying again and again and again toxic heavy metals directly named on primary geoengineering patents are showing up everywhere in the environment. Metals like aluminum, barium, the same metals linked to these neurological diseases. We have national organizations like NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, admitting the atmosphere is full of particles and they don't know where it's coming from. How could they not know? Because they're paid not to know. They're paid not to know. Again, this article continues, these changes were seen in all 21 countries surveyed, but the United States fared the worst by far. What a surprise. Most powerful military, largest military, experiencing the highest level of climate modification and thus the most neurological disease eruption. In the United States, the article continues, neurological deaths in older men skyrocketed. They went exponential from 89 to 2010. More elderly U.S. women are now dying from brain diseases than from cancer for the first time in recorded history. Everything we would expect to see with massive toxic heavy metal exposure that's not coming from China, by the way. California Air Resources Board proved these aerosols don't float across oceans. This is of much lower local origin, much more local. We have spray dispersions happening above our head every single day. It couldn't be more obvious. We have film footage of these tankers spraying, turning on and off. Military tankers, I challenge anybody to investigate. And I appeal to our military brothers and sisters, by the way, we need you to wake up. We absolutely need you to wake up and understand what you're participating in. I salute your motivation for your service, but blind obedience to people in power who absolutely do not have the best interest of humanity or the U.S. population in mind should not be obeyed. This article continues, the researchers' analysis showed that the findings could not simply be explained away by improved treatment of other diseases. In other words, there's a major factor in this equation not being acknowledged. A direct quote from the main researcher, crucially, it is not just because people are living longer to get diseases they previously would not have lived long enough to develop, but older people are developing neurological disease more than ever before by far. Instead, a large part of the cause must be environmental changes that have taken place over the past 2 decades. Back to environmental changes, again and again. What's in our air? The article continues, the study continues, I should say, we are like walking antennas. These results will not be welcome news as there are many with short-term vested interests, like the military-industrial complex, by the way, that will want to ignore them, like the medical industry as well. Aluminum has also been linked, this is from the study I'm reading, aluminum has also been linked to dementia. For example, a 2009 study published in the American Journal of Epidemiology found that people with the highest aluminum content in their drinking water also had the highest risk of dementia. Clinical studies have also directly linked aluminum to brain damage. What a surprise. Mass distraction from mainstream media. That's what we have. That's why a population is no longer awake and aware enough to see what's happening in the skies above their heads, to bother to look, to bother to investigate it. What does mainstream media show us? Stories from this week. The deflated football story on CNN, that's more important. CNN and other organizations, Fox, MSNBC, the rest of them, are paid to distract the public. Various carefully selected dramas, political theater, all the while the planet is burning and dying by the day. If you don't believe that this is happening, if you don't believe that things are this bad, you will. Wait and see. We are told to fear the terrorists, but who are the terrorists exactly? Those who are lying to us. Those who are spraying each and every one of us day in, day out like insects. If we know that our own government is spraying us with highly toxic elements relating to the climate modification, which is nothing less than weather warfare and biological warfare, if we know it is historical fact that numerous biological tests have been conducted on innocent civilian Americans on U.S. soil without their knowledge or consent, if we know, and this is historical fact, by the way, if we know this is our own government doing this, why in the world would we believe the official narrative on issues like 9/11? There are now organizations like 9/11 A&E for Truth, 9/11 Architects and Engineers for Truth, with over 2,500 of the top architects and engineers from around the globe stating on the record at the top of their lungs that the official narrative for what happened on 9/11 is a completely impossible lie. Building 7 is the most glaring example of this lie. Most, again, don't even know there was a third high-rise that collapsed on 9/11. 47-story steel structure high-rise that fell in 7 seconds, free fall speed. This building never got hit by anything. We're told collapse occurred because some furniture was burning on the first floor. If you believe this, you're not living in reality. You're not willing to face it. How does this all fit together with climate modification, hurricane suppression, and toxic heavy metal contamination, which is rapidly sickening the population and killing the planet and all life on it? Because all of this insanity is coming from the same source. All of it stems directly from elements in our own government that are part of the global power structure. The cancerous criminal cabal will stop at nothing to gain total control. Populations are not only expendable to them, but an ever-increasing liability. The biosphere is collapsing, and civilization will follow. Again, if you don't believe it, you will soon enough. Wait and see. We all have a responsibility to our children. We have a responsibility to the whole. As Martin Luther King said, there comes a time when silence is betrayal, and that time has long since come. Standing up and making your voice heard for the common good is not an option, it's an obligation. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Make your voice heard while you can. Educate yourself on what is unfolding. Help to wake up others. Every day counts in this battle. This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org Radio and Global Alert News. Until next week, thank you very much.
Spring showers a welcome and rarely seen sight in China's Inner Mongolia region. Chinese officials say this rain is the first to fall on Tunglao City in 15 years, and they credit cloud seeding for the downpour. However, proving those claims is nearly impossible. Local officials say they launched 258 rockets and used airplanes to spray dry ice and liquid nitrogen in the atmosphere. China spends millions of dollars every year on the world's largest cloud seeding program, using it frequently to mitigate drought and to clear the skies of dust and pollution just like they did before the Beijing Olympics. More than 130 countries around the world have similar weather modification programs, but China makes the biggest claims about its capabilities. Some countries make rain to help ease water shortages, some to prevent flooding, and others to prevent hail from forming. There is evidence that cloud seeding can cause some increase in rain if the right clouds under the right circumstances are chosen. But just how broadly it can be applied, well, that remains a matter of debate. Jennifer Delgado, CNN, Atlanta.
You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion, though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really, to change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning. Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo-jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops, and if they don't have them, there's the consequences of famine?
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes. All of them could be subject to weather modification.